Hey, what's up folks? If you have a Z9 and you want to know how I map all the individual function buttons specifically for wildlife photography, then stick around because this video is for you. Right, so with my function button layout and mapping, nothing is set in stone, let me just remind you, and you might be able to find something that works better for your use case. As I said, please bear in mind I'm a wildlife photographer, so this pertains directly to that, and the need for often big changes in your focusing systems very quickly. We don't have a studio to work with, we've got animals that are various distances from us, moving a lot and in lots of different lights. So with that said, let's jump into my first function button. So if you need to, or if you're a little bit confused as to how to change these function buttons, just come straight to your menu, scroll down to your custom settings menu, scroll across till you get to controls, go into controls and go to custom controls for shooting. Now you'll see for my first function 1 button, which is this button over here, that's function 1, function 2, function 3, and then I guess we could call this function 4 over here, that's on the vertical grip. Anyway, for function 1, what I'd like to do is set this to a wider area for focusing, and the way that I do that is by going into this, changing this function 1 to AF area mode, and I change that to the wide, or to wide area small. Right, so what that looks like in your shooting menu, or when you're on your shooting screen, is like this. So this is my general focusing system. As you can see in the top there, I've got it to AFC, or autofocus continuous, with 3D tracking and animal detection. So that means that as soon as I push AF on, that box lights up in yellow, and it's immediately looking for movement from an animal or an animal's eye within the frame. But oftentimes this is maybe a little bit too jumpy, it's maybe not too accurate, and so what you really want to do is direct the camera a little bit more as to where you are trying to get it to focus, and that's where this comes in. You just push and hold function 1 and it brings up your small wide area, and wherever you move that small wide area to is where the camera is going to primarily focus and look for movement. So yeah, it's not a perfect thing, but it does help quite a bit in sticky situations. Right, my next function button is this one. So function 2, I changed this to, once again, another auto-focusing system, but this one is dynamic area AF small. And for those of you that have just made the jump to mirrorless, you'll notice that there's a lot going on with the focusing systems. There's all these fancy eye detection, face detection, move detection, whatever detection. But a lot of the time, it doesn't matter how good the camera is at this point in time, you need to make use of that old school, move your focusing point around and attain focus that way. And the way you do that is if you go to your shooting menu in 3D, AFC, push function 2, and you straight away get that old school box that we all used to from old Nikons, Canons and so forth, where you can just move it around. There's no tracking involved here. As you can see in the top there, it says AFC and then single. And this just allows you to move around, get it over the animal's eye, get it over the animal's paw, whatever it is that you're trying to get, and then take your photograph like that. So yeah, very, very powerful, and we need to remember that the old school way of focusing is still very relevant these days. So don't rely too much on the tracking, have this ready to rock and roll. Right, the next function button I set is FN3. Now, another thing with mirrorless cameras is that they all take a large amount of photographs per second. The Z9 will do 20 frames per second in full RAW or lossless compression, as Nikon likes to call it. It can even shoot up to 120 frames a second in JPEG. It's a very small file, but yeah, that kind of shows you the mirrorless tech. On my D850, even with the battery grip attached, I was only getting 9 frames a second. And for the most part, 9 frames a second was perfectly fine. And I find 20 frames a second to be just way too much. You have so much deleting to do. You don't know which one of the 400 photographs you just took needs to be edited, which one's the best. It throws you off. So what I do is I try and leverage this the frames per second modes in this camera. And so let's say, for example, I mean, generally speaking, I'm in 10 frames per second, but let's say, for example, there's a lion fight or a lion's on a kill, bird about to take off, whatever it is, an animal running. What you really want to be able to do is quickly change that. So function 3 is mapped to that. I just push and hold it and I can scroll up to 20 frames a second, down to 15 frames a second, down to 12 frames a second, 10 frames a second. I usually work between 10 and 12, sometimes going up to 15 and very rarely going up to 20 frames a second, but it definitely has its use cases. Right, the last or the next function key, not quite the last one, the next function key is the one that's on the grip. You can see on the little diagram there, it's showing you where it is, but it's just up over here. there it is, right next to on your vertical grip, right next to your shutter and ISO button. And what I like to do with this is also change it to the focusing area, or so I can change that. So if we go back to shooting, I'm not going to turn the camera because it's going to make your screen all weird, but if I push and hold that, you can see AFC and 3D at the top there get highlighted. If I use my thumb, I can change AFC to manual or AFS. All right, so you can change that quite nice and quickly. I can use then one of my my middle finger, and I can change this to single points or to 3D. So it just depends on what you need for a specific situation, but to have this built into the vertical grip is very, very useful. And let's not forget that on the vertical grip, you can also reach function 3 right over there, which means you can change your frame rate. So that's pretty handy to have. You've got your ISO button, changing your focusing system and changing your frames per second. Very, very useful to have ready to rock and roll. Then the next one I wanted to show you was just this. This is one that a lot of people do, or we used to do on the D850. Used to come in quite handy, but on this, what I like to do is on your video record button, which is this one over here, in your photography mode or just shooting stills, this is a redundant button, so why not map it to do something useful for you? And what I found to be the most useful so far is to put framing grids on. So if I'm looking through my lens like this, you can see the grids are on. If I push the record button, the grids go away and grids come back. Grids go away and come back. So that really helps with getting the horizon straight, also framing your subjects, trying to make use of that rule of thirds, which doesn't always have to happen, but it does help quite a bit in making sure that your image has the correct proportions and so forth. Now, one thing I wanted to show you that's pretty cool about the Nikon Z range or S range of lenses is you can also change your function buttons on your lens, and you can even change, there's function rings, which is pretty cool. So yeah, you might find some pretty cool uses for that. So that's what I do for my function buttons. I hope this has helped. Don't forget, there is on the Z9 this handy little auto-focusing or focusing system button has made a return from the old school DSLRs, which is very, very cool. But when you're in the thick of things, when things are happening very quickly, you really want to have control of your focusing system at your fingertips, essentially. And this is the way that I do that. Now remember, this is evolving. I could change this. I'm feeling it out still, but so far I've found really, really good success in having my camera set up like this, and I hope it helps you too. Please feel free to post comments below, and I'll happily get back to you. Cheers.